The dust caked onto Rose Jensen's cracked lips tasted like blood and defeat as she stumbled along the Nevada trail, each step threatening to be her last. Her cotton dress, once a respectable pale blue, hung in tatters around her legs, the hem darkened with dirt and torn from catching on sagebrush. The August sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on the high desert plateau, and she could no longer remember how many days it had been since the stagecoach accident, since she had watched the driver die with an arrow through his chest, since she had run blindly into this vast emptiness with nothing but terror driving her forward. Her vision blurred and doubled. The rocky ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She tried to take another step, but her knees buckled. Rose collapsed onto the hard earth, too exhausted even to cry. Her canteen had been empty since yesterday, or was it the day before? Time had lost all meaning under the relentless sun. She closed her eyes, wondering if this was how her story would end, alone in the wilderness at 22 years old, never having reached White Pine where her aunt supposedly waited. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness. Rose forced her eyes open, squinting against the harsh light. A figure on horseback materialized through the heat shimmer, and for a moment she thought it might be a mirage, another cruel trick her desperate mind was playing. But the horse's hooves striking stone sounded too real, too solid. "Jesus Christ," a deep voice muttered, and suddenly a man was crouching beside her, his shadow falling across her face like a blessing. "Madam, can you hear me?" Rose tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed a weak nod. Through her blurred vision, she made out a young face, tanned and concerned, beneath a dusty brown hat. He had dark eyes that studied her with genuine worry, and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "I am going to help you," he said firmly. "My name is Matthew Yates. You are safe now." He uncapped his canteen and brought it to her lips. Rose drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. The cowboy pulled it back gently. "Not too fast, you will make yourself sick." After a few more careful sips, Rose found her voice. "The stagecoach raiders attacked. Everyone else is dead." Matthew's expression darkened. "How long ago?" "3 days. 4, I do not know any more, I just kept walking." He looked her over, taking in her shredded dress, the cuts on her arms, the ugly bruises on her ankles. "You walked for 4 days through this desert." "I did not know what else to do," Rose whispered. Fresh tears leaked from her eyes. "I did not want to die there with them." Matthew stood and looked around at the desolate landscape, then back down at her. "Can you stand?" Rose tried, but her legs refused to cooperate. She was too tired to keep going. The cowboy did not hesitate. He lifted her onto his horse, surprisingly gentle for his rough appearance, and swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to steady her as she swayed. "Easy now," he said quietly. "I have got you." Instead of spurring the horse to speed, Matthew led it slowly, mindful of her condition. Rose slumped back against his solid chest, too exhausted to maintain even the pretense of propriety. His body was warm and steady behind hers, and for the first time in days she felt something other than terror. "Where were you headed?" Matthew asked after they had traveled in silence for a while. "White Pine. My aunt lives there, Rebecca Jensen. Do you know her?" "I know the name." "She runs a boarding house, does she not?" Rose nodded weakly. "My parents died of fever last spring. Aunt Rebecca is my only family left. She sent money for my passage from Missouri." "That is still a good 20 miles from here," Matthew said, "but there is a ranch about 5 miles north." "The Copper Creek Ranch. My family's place. We need to get you there first, get you cleaned up and rested before you go anywhere else." "I cannot impose," Rose began, but he cut her off. "Madam, you can barely sit upright. You are in no condition to make it to White Pine today." My mother would have my hide if I rode past our door with an injured woman and did not stop. Rose did not have the strength to argue. She let herself relax against him, listening to the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and Matthew's breathing. Despite the circumstances, despite her terror and exhaustion, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's arms. "What were you doing out here?" she asked after a while, needing to stay awake, afraid if she closed her eyes she might never open them again. "Tracking strays. We have had cattle wandering off, probably spooked by that same raiding party that hit your stage. There has been trouble with renegades in these parts lately. They are not even Apache, just outlaws using the fear of raids to cover their crimes." "They killed the driver," Rose said, her voice breaking. "Shot him right through the chest. The other passengers ran in different directions. I heard screaming behind me, but I just kept running. Does that make me a coward?" Matthew's arm tightened around her waist. "That makes you a survivor. There is no shame in that." The ranch appeared as they crested a low ridge. It was not fancy, just a sturdy wooden house with a barn and several outbuildings, but to Rose it looked like salvation. Several horses grazed in a corral and chickens scattered as they approached. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her eyes widened when she saw Matthew's passenger. "Matthew? Who is this?" "Found her about 5 miles south, Ma. She was in the stagecoach that got hit by raiders. Been walking through the desert for days." The woman hurried forward, her expression shifting to one of immediate concern. "You poor thing. Matthew, get her inside. I will heat water for a bath." Matthew dismounted and reached up to lift Rose down. Her legs buckled the moment they touched ground, and he caught her easily, simply scooping her up and carrying her toward the house. Rose wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but her body had other ideas. Inside, the house was blessedly cool and smelled of bread and coffee. Matthew carried her to a bedroom and set her carefully on the bed. His mother appeared with a cup of water and some bread. "I am Martha Yates," she said kindly. "You just rest now, dear. What is your name?" "Rose Jensen," she managed. "I am so sorry to intrude. I was trying to reach White Pine." "Rebecca Jensen's niece." Martha's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, she has been worried sick about you. The stage was supposed to arrive 3 days ago. We heard there had been an attack, but no one knew if there were survivors. She will be so relieved." "Can someone send word to her?" Rose asked. "Of course. Matthew, ride into town and tell Rebecca her niece is alive and safe here." But Matthew hesitated, looking at Rose with an expression she could not quite read. "I will go after we know she is all right. No fever, no serious injuries." Martha gave her son a knowing look but did not argue. "Then make yourself useful and bring in the tub. This poor girl needs a proper bath." Over the next hour, Rose was tended to with a kindness that brought tears to her eyes. Martha helped her out of her ruined dress and into a tub of warm water, washing away days of dirt and fear. She cleaned and bandaged the cuts on Rose's arms and legs, applied salve to her sunburned face, and gave her a clean nightgown to wear. "You are a lucky young woman," Martha said as she brushed out Rose's tangled blonde hair. "Another day in that sun and you might not have made it." "Your son saved my life," Rose said quietly. Martha smiled. "He is a good man, my Matthew. Takes after his father, God rest his soul. Lost him 2 years ago to pneumonia. It has been just Matthew and me running this place since then. I am sorry for your loss. We manage. Matthew is strong and capable. He will make some woman a fine husband someday." Martha's tone was perhaps a bit too casual, and Rose felt her cheeks warm despite herself. When Martha finally left her to rest, Rose lay back on the soft bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached in a dozen places, but she was clean and safe and alive. The memory of Matthew's arms around her, his steady presence behind her on the horse, kept replaying in her mind. She barely knew him, had met him only hours ago under the worst possible circumstances, yet something about him made her feel protected in a way she had not felt since her father died. She must have dozed off because when she woke, the light slanting through the window had changed. Someone had left a tray with soup and fresh bread on the table beside the bed. Rose sat up carefully, testing her body's limits. She was stiff and sore, but stronger than before. She managed to eat half the soup before exhaustion pulled her under again. The next time she woke, it was dark outside. A lamp burned low on the dresser, casting soft shadows around the room. Rose heard voices from the other part of the house, low and concerned. She recognized Matthew's deep rumble and his mother's lighter tones. She was trying to reach Rebecca Jensen, Matthew was saying. Once she is well enough, I will take her to White Pine. Rebecca would come here, but she cannot leave the boarding house. She has guests to tend to, Martha replied. Perhaps in a few days when Rose is stronger. There was a pause, then Martha spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You carried her very gently, Matthew. She weighs hardly anything, Ma. The woman nearly died out there. That is not what I meant. Another pause. Rose held her breath, straining to hear. She is pretty, Martha continued, and well-spoken. Rebecca mentioned in her letters that her niece had some schooling. Ma, please do not start. I am just saying, you are 26 years old, and you spend all your time with cattle and horses. When was the last time you even spoke to a young woman? I am speaking to one now, am I not? Sleeping in our guest room. You know what I mean, Matthew Yates. Matthew's response was too quiet for Rose to hear, but it made Martha laugh. Rose felt her face flush. She should not be eavesdropping, but something about hearing them discuss her made her heart beat faster. She spent the next 2 days recovering at the Copper Creek Ranch. Martha fussed over her like a mother hen, feeding her hearty meals and insisting she rest. Matthew was often out working, but Rose saw him at mealtimes. He was quiet and respectful, asking after her health but never pressing her to talk about the attack. Rose found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way his hands moved when he talked, the laugh lines around his eyes, the gentleness with which he treated his mother. On the 3rd day, Rose felt strong enough to sit outside on the porch. Martha brought her some mending to do, saying it would be good to keep her hands busy. Rose was hemming a shirt when Matthew rode up, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent his whole life on horseback. You have some color back in your cheeks, he observed, climbing the porch steps. That is good to see. I feel almost human again, Rose admitted. Thanks to you and your mother. Matthew leaned against the porch rail, studying her. I sent word to your aunt. She wants to come out here to see you, but I told her to wait until you were ready to travel. Figured you did not need a bunch of fussing and crying while you were trying to heal. That was thoughtful of you. Ma said maybe in another day or 2 you will be strong enough for the ride to White Pine. I will take you personally, make sure you get there safe. Something in Rose's chest tightened at the thought of leaving, which was absurd. She barely knew these people. She had come to Nevada to start a new life with her aunt, not to develop feelings for the first cowboy who showed her kindness. Yet she could not deny the flutter in her stomach whenever Matthew was near, or the way she found herself looking for him throughout the day. I do not know how I will ever repay you, Rose said softly. You saved my life, and your mother has been so kind. Matthew shook his head. No repayment necessary. It is what any decent person would do. You would be surprised how few decent people there are in the world, Rose said, thinking of the raiders, of the way they had laughed as they attacked the stage. You are a good man, Matthew Yates. Something flickered in his dark eyes, an emotion Rose could not quite name. "You are easy to be good to, Rose Jensen." The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. Then Martha called from inside about supper, and the spell was broken. That evening, after they had eaten, Martha pulled out a fiddle and insisted Matthew play. Rose discovered he had hidden talents. His rough hands moved across the strings with surprising delicacy, coaxing out a lively tune that made Martha clap and laugh. Then he played something slower, sweeter, and Rose felt the music wrap around her like a warm blanket. When he finished, Rose applauded softly. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play?" "My father taught me. Said a man should know how to make music as well as work cattle. Keeps the soul from drying up." "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Matthew agreed, his voice thick with old grief. "Lost him too soon." "I understand that feeling," Rose said quietly. "Losing my parents, it felt like the world just stopped making sense for a while." Their eyes met across the room, and Rose saw her own pain reflected back at her. They were both orphans of a sort, both trying to rebuild lives that had been shattered by loss. The connection between them felt deeper suddenly, more significant than just survivor and rescuer. The next morning, Rose woke feeling truly rested for the first time since the attack. She dressed in a borrowed dress of Martha's, which had been altered to fit her slighter frame, and ventured outside. She found Matthew in the barn, grooming his horse. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile that made her heart skip. "You are up early." "I have been sleeping too much. I wanted to see the ranch properly." Matthew set down his brush. "Want a tour?" He showed her around the property, explaining the workings of the ranch with quiet pride. They had about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land to graze them all comfortably. It was not a huge operation, but it was solid and well maintained. "My father built this place from nothing," Matthew said as they stood looking out over the pastures. "Came out here in 1861, right at the start of the war. He did not want to fight, so he came west instead. Worked for other ranches until he had saved enough to buy this land. Met my mother in Carson City, convinced her to take a chance on a broke cowboy with big dreams. They made something beautiful together," Rose said. "They did. And I am determined to keep it going, to honor what they built." He glanced at her. "What about you? What were your plans when you reached White Pine?" Rose sighed. "Honestly, I am not entirely sure. Help my aunt with the boarding house, I suppose. Try to build a new life. Everything I knew is back in Missouri, but there is nothing left for me there now." "Starting over is not easy," Matthew said. "But sometimes it is necessary." "Is that what you did? After your father died, in a way. I had to figure out how to run this place without him, how to make decisions he would have been proud of. Some days I still feel like I am stumbling around in the dark." Rose touched his arm gently. "From what I can see, you are doing a wonderful job." Matthew looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "Rose, I know we just met and under strange circumstances, but I find myself not wanting you to leave tomorrow." Her breath caught. "I feel the same way. That is crazy, is it not? I barely know you." "Sometimes you just know," Rose said softly. "My mother told me that once. She said when she met my father, she knew within a day that he was the one. I always thought she was exaggerating, but now I understand." Matthew reached up and gently touched her cheek. "I think about you all the time, when I am out working, when I am trying to sleep. I keep seeing you as you looked when I found you, so small and brave and determined to survive. I was not brave, I was terrified. Bravery and terror are not opposites. You can be both at once." Rose leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "What do we do, Matthew?" "I need to go to my aunt. She is expecting me, and I cannot impose on your mother's hospitality forever." Come to White Pine tomorrow as planned, Matthew said. Stay with your aunt, settle in, but let me court you properly. Let me come calling, take you to church socials, whatever is proper and right. And if you find that you still feel this way after some time has passed, after you have had a chance to think clearly, then we will figure out the rest together. You would do that. Even though it means riding 20 miles each way just to see me. I would ride 100 miles if it meant seeing your smile, Matthew said, and the sincerity in his voice made Rose's eyes prick with tears. She stretched up and kissed his cheek, quick and soft. Then yes. Court me properly, Matthew Yates. I would like that very much. The next morning, Rose said a tearful goodbye to Martha, who hugged her tight and whispered, "You take care of yourself, dear, and do not be a stranger. I expect to see you again very soon." Matthew had his horse saddled and a gentle mare ready for Rose. She was nervous about riding after so long, but he was patient, adjusting her stirrups and making sure she was comfortable before they set out. The ride to White Pine took most of the morning, moving at an easy pace. The town was larger than Rose had expected, with a main street lined with shops and businesses, and several side streets with houses and churches. Matthew led her to a 2-story building near the center of town, with a sign reading Jensen's boarding house. Before they could dismount, a woman came rushing out of the front door. She was in her 40s, with blonde hair shot through with silver and eyes the same blue as Rose's. "Rose. Oh, my dear girl, Rose." Rose barely had time to get off the horse before her aunt enveloped her in a crushing embrace. Rebecca was crying and laughing at the same time, holding Rose at arm's length to look at her, then pulling her close again. "I thought you were dead," Rebecca sobbed. "When the stage did not arrive and then we heard about the attack, I was sure you were gone. I have been out of my mind with worry." "I am all right, Aunt Rebecca, thanks to Matthew here." Rebecca finally seemed to notice the cowboy who had dismounted and was standing respectfully to one side. Her expression changed to one of profound gratitude. "You are the one who found her." "Yes, madam." "Matthew Yates from the Copper Creek Ranch, Martha's son." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Oh, your mother sent word, but I did not realize. Bless you, young man. I am forever in your debt." Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "No debt, madam, just happy she is safe." Rebecca ushered them both inside, insisting Matthew stay for lunch. The boarding house was clean and welcoming, with a large dining room and comfortable sitting area. Several guests were present, and Rebecca introduced Rose to everyone with pride, explaining over and over how her brave niece had survived the attack and walked for days through the desert. Over lunch, Matthew was quiet, letting Rose and her aunt catch up. But Rose was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he occasionally glanced at her with soft eyes. When the meal was finished and he stood to leave, Rose walked him out to his horse. "When will I see you again?" she asked, not caring if she sounded too eager. "There is a church social this Saturday," Matthew said. "Would you allow me to escort you?" "I would love that." He smiled, touching the brim of his hat. "Then it is a date, Saturday at 3 o'clock. Rose watched him ride away, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was racing. She turned to find her aunt standing in the doorway, watching her with a knowing smile. "He is a good man," Rebecca said, "and he looks at you like you hung the moon." Rose blushed. "Is it wrong that I have feelings for him already? I barely know him." "Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up," Rebecca said gently. "Your mother was the same way. She fell for your father in less than a week." Over the next 2 months, Matthew proved himself to be a dedicated suitor. He came to White Pine every Saturday, riding the 40-mile round trip just to spend a few hours with Rose. They attended church socials together, went on chaperoned walks through town, and had dinner at the boarding house with Rebecca watching over them like a benevolent hawk. Rose discovered more about Matthew with each visit. He was thoughtful and considerate, always bringing small gifts, flowers from his mother's garden or a book he thought she might enjoy. He was honest to a fault, telling her about the struggles of running the ranch alone, about his fears that he was not good enough to maintain his father's legacy. He was funny, making her laugh with stories about stubborn cattle and mischievous horses. Most importantly, he listened. When Rose talked about her grief over losing her parents, about the terror of the attack, about her fears for the future, Matthew gave her his complete attention. He never minimized her feelings or tried to rush her through them. He just held her hand and let her speak. Rose fell more deeply in love with him with each passing week. She helped her aunt run the boarding house, learning the business and making a place for herself in White Pine. But her heart was always counting the days until Saturday, until Matthew would ride into town with that soft smile just for her. One Saturday in late October, Matthew arrived with a serious expression. Instead of suggesting a walk or attending the social, he asked Rebecca if he could speak with Rose privately on the porch. "I want to show you something," he said, helping Rose onto the mare he had brought for her. "It is about an hour's ride. Will you trust me, always?" Rose said without hesitation. They rode out of town, heading north. The autumn air was crisp and cool, the sky a brilliant blue. Matthew led her along familiar paths until the Copper Creek Ranch came into view. But instead of heading to the main house, he guided them to a rise overlooking the property. "See that spot there?" He pointed to a flat area near a creek, shaded by cottonwood trees. "I have been thinking about building a house there, a bigger place than what my parents built. Something with room for a family." Rose's heart began to pound. "That sounds lovely." Matthew dismounted and helped her down, then took both her hands in his. "Rose, I know we have only known each other for 2 months. I know that is not very long by some people's standards. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about my feelings for you." "Matthew," Rose whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes and the way you listen to my worries without judging. I love how you help my mother in the kitchen when you visit, and how you talk to the horses like they can understand you. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "This was my grandmother's ring. She gave it to my father when he proposed to my mother. Rose Jensen, will you marry me? Will you let me build that house by the creek and fill it with our love and our children and our dreams?" Rose was crying openly now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Matthew, I will marry you. I love you too. I have loved you since you found me in the desert and made me feel safe. I have loved you through every visit, every conversation, every moment we have spent together." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and filled with promise, and Rose felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They rode back to White Pine together, holding hands whenever the path allowed them to ride side by side. Rebecca took one look at Rose's glowing face and the ring on her finger and burst into happy tears, hugging them both and declaring it was the best news she had heard in years. That evening they sat together in the boarding house parlor and made plans. They would marry in the spring, giving Matthew time to build the house by the creek. Rose would continue helping her aunt until the wedding, and then she would move to the Copper Creek Ranch as Matthew's wife. "Are you sure you want to live on a ranch?" Matthew asked, suddenly worried. It is hard work and it can be lonely sometimes. Rose squeezed his hand. I want to be wherever you are. Besides, I have never been afraid of hard work, and I will not be lonely with you there. They were married in April of 1879 in the small church in White Pine. The whole town turned out for the wedding, along with neighboring ranchers and their families. Martha cried through the entire ceremony, and Rebecca stood as Rose's matron of honor. Rose wore a dress of cream silk that Rebecca had spent months sewing, and Matthew wore his best suit with a string tie. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed Rose with a tenderness that made the women in the congregation sigh. They held a reception at the boarding house, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. As the sun set, Matthew and Rose climbed into a wagon decorated with flowers and drove out to the Copper Creek Ranch, to the house that Matthew had built for them. It was beautiful. 2 stories, with large windows that let in plenty of light, a wide porch perfect for sitting on summer evenings, and a stone fireplace in the main room. Matthew had furnished it simply but well, with sturdy handmade furniture and cheerful curtains in the windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," Matthew said, lifting Rose over the threshold. Rose looked around at their new home, at the life they would build together, and felt overwhelming joy. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Everything is perfect." Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and deep happiness. Rose learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Martha with the garden and the chickens, cooking meals for Matthew and the occasional ranch hand they hired for big jobs. She learned to ride well, often accompanying Matthew when he checked on the cattle. She discovered she had a knack for keeping the ranch books, organizing their finances in a way that made Matthew's life easier. But more than the work, Rose reveled in the simple intimacy of married life. She loved waking up in Matthew's arms every morning, loved the way he kissed her goodbye before heading out to work, loved sitting together on the porch in the evenings while he played his fiddle and she mended clothes. They talked about everything and nothing, shared their dreams and fears, and built a partnership based on mutual respect and deep love. In the spring of 1880, Rose discovered she was pregnant. Matthew was overjoyed, immediately becoming overprotective, insisting she rest more and work less. Martha was thrilled at the prospect of a grandchild, knitting tiny blankets and clothes with enthusiasm. Their son was born in November of 1880, a healthy baby with Matthew's dark eyes and Rose's blonde hair. They named him James, after Matthew's father. Holding her son for the first time, Rose felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. She looked up at Matthew, who was gazing at their baby with wonder, and felt grateful beyond words for this life they had built together. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Rose gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1882, and another son named Thomas in 1884. The house by the creek rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. The ranch prospered under Matthew's careful management, growing slowly but steadily. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1886, surrounded by her family. They buried her next to Matthew's father on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Matthew played his fiddle at her graveside, tears streaming down his face as he played her favorite hymns. Rebecca visited often from White Pine, doting on her great-niece and great-nephews, bringing treats and stories from town. The boarding house continued to thrive, and eventually, Rebecca took on a partner to help manage it, giving her more time to visit the ranch. As the years turned into decades, Rose and Matthew's love only deepened. They weathered droughts and harsh winters together, celebrated good years and mourned losses. They watched their children grow strong and capable, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of family. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Matthew surprised Rose with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children with Rebecca. It was Rose's first time seeing the ocean, and she stood on the beach with tears in her eyes, marveling at the vastness of it. "Thank you," she said to Matthew that evening as they walked along the waterfront, "for everything, for saving my life, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful family." Matthew pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I should be thanking you. You made my life worth living. Before I found you in that desert, I was just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me joy. You are my everything, Rose. Do you ever wonder how different our lives would be if you had not found me that day?" Rose asked. "I do not have to wonder," Matthew said firmly. "Because I did find you, and every day since then has been a gift." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to face whatever challenges the new century would bring. Their children grew into fine adults. James took over more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication his father had. Sarah married a teacher from White Pine and started a school in the area, bringing education to ranch families who had previously had no access. Thomas became a skilled horse trainer, earning a reputation throughout Nevada for his gentle methods. As Rose and Matthew entered their 50s, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility. They spent more time on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on, holding hands like newlyweds. In 1910, on a warm summer evening, they sat together on that porch surrounded by their children and grandchildren. James had married and had 3 children of his own. Sarah had 2 daughters. Thomas had recently gotten engaged to a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. "Tell us again how you met," Sarah's youngest daughter begged. She was 6 years old and never tired of the story. Rose and Matthew exchanged a smile, and Matthew began the tale they had told countless times. "It was August of 1878, and I was out tracking strays when I saw something in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman, collapsed in the desert. She had walked for days after surviving an attack on her stagecoach. She was too tired to keep going," Rose continued, taking up the story. "And this cowboy lifted me onto his horse and led it slowly, so carefully, taking me to safety. He saved my life that day." "And then you fell in love?" the little girl asked, as she always did. "And then we fell in love," Matthew confirmed. "Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a stranger in the desert. Best thing that ever happened to me, being found by you," Rose added. They lived many more years together, growing old side by side on the ranch they loved. When Matthew passed away in 1918 at the age of 66, Rose mourned him deeply but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. Rose lived until 1925, dying peacefully at the age of 69, surrounded by family. Her last words were about Matthew, about how she could not wait to see him again. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the cottonwood trees where he had proposed all those years ago. Their great-granddaughter found a journal years later, tucked away in the attic of the old house by the creek. It was Rose's diary from those early years, filled with entries about falling in love with Matthew, about building their life together. The last entry was from their first anniversary. It read, "I used to think that day in the desert was the worst day of my life, but now I understand it was actually the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought me to Matthew. He lifted me up when I could not go on, and he has been lifting me up ever since. I am the luckiest woman in the world to be loved by such a man. Whatever happens in our future, I know we will face it together, and that makes me brave. He gave me my life back, and I will spend the rest of it loving him with everything I have." The ranch remained in the family for generations, each passing down the story of how it all began with a cowboy who found a woman dying in the desert and chose to help her. It became a family legend, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the greatest blessings, and that love can bloom in the most unexpected places. The house by the creek still stands, restored and maintained by the family. Visitors can still see the rise where Matthew proposed to Rose, can walk through the rooms where they raised their children, can sit on the porch where they spent countless evenings together. And if you listen carefully on quiet nights, some say you can still hear the faint sound of a fiddle playing, as if Matthew's music has soaked into the very walls of the place he built for the woman he loved. Their story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the enduring power of love, to the strength of commitment, and to the beauty that can come from choosing compassion in a harsh world. Matthew could have ridden past that day in 1878. He could have assumed Rose was already dead, or decided it was not his problem. But he stopped, he helped, and in doing so he changed both their lives forever. Rose could have given up in that desert. She could have laid down to die when exhaustion overtook her. But she kept fighting, kept pushing forward, and survived just long enough to be found. Her determination to live, combined with Matthew's willingness to help, created a love story that would be remembered for over a century. The children and grandchildren often reflected on how much had stemmed from that single moment of choice. If Matthew had not been tracking strays that day, if he had taken a different path, if Rose had collapsed just a mile further in any direction, they might never have met. All the joy, all the love, all the family that came after hinged on that one intersection of two lives in the vast Nevada desert. But perhaps that is the nature of love. It often arrives when we least expect it, in forms we do not anticipate. It asks us to be brave, to be vulnerable, to trust in something bigger than ourselves. Rose and Matthew understood that. They built their entire lives on the foundation of trust, established in those first moments when she was at her most vulnerable, and he chose to be gentle. As the 20th century progressed, and the world changed around the Copper Creek Ranch, the values Rose and Matthew had established remained constant. Their descendants carried forward the lessons they had learned from watching their love. That kindness matters, that perseverance pays off, that true partnership means supporting each other through everything, and that love is not just a feeling but a daily choice to show up for someone else. The ranch adapted with the times, incorporating new technologies and methods, but the heart of it remained the same. It was still a place where family came first, where hard work was respected, where the land was treated with care, and where the story of Rose and Matthew was told to every new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. In the end, their love story was not extraordinary because of grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was extraordinary because it was real, because it endured, because two people chose each other every single day for more than 40 years. It was extraordinary because it showed that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger on a horse, and sometimes love begins with simple kindness in the midst of suffering. Rose used to say in her later years that she had lived two lives. The first ended in that desert when she collapsed, too exhausted to take another step. The second began when Matthew lifted her onto his horse and led it slowly toward safety. That second life, the one she built with him, was everything she never knew she needed. It was proof that endings can become beginnings, that tragedy can lead to joy, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Matthew would add that finding Rose was like finding a piece of himself he did not know was missing. Before her, he had been content but not complete. After her, everything made sense. His purpose crystallized. His future brightened. He often said that he had not saved her that day in the desert. She had saved him, given him a reason to build something beautiful, a partner to share the burden and multiply the joy. Their love story became a cornerstone of their family's identity, a north star that guided how they treated each other and approached life. It taught them that vulnerability is not weakness, that asking for help is not failure, that offering help is always the right choice, and that love worth having is love worth fighting for. As seasons changed and years passed at the Copper Creek Ranch, as children grew and had children of their own, as the world outside transformed in ways Rose and Matthew could never have imagined, their legacy remained solid and true. They had taken a moment of crisis and transformed it into a lifetime of love. They had taken two broken hearts, grieving lost parents and lost partners, and healed them together. They had taken empty land and filled it with life and laughter. And it all started because she was too tired to keep going, and a cowboy lifted her onto his horse and led it slowly, carefully, gently toward home. Toward their home. Toward the life they would build together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. It was the kind of love that does not just exist in stories. It was the kind of love that builds families, shapes communities, and leaves the world better than it found it. It was the kind of love that lasts forever.